the Council, humanitarians continue to operate in a very difficult environment. From December last year to February this year, aid agencies reported 137 access constraints. The majority were interference in humanitarian programming and movement restrictions in areas controlled by the Houthi de facto authorities, in particular for Yemeni women aid workers. I saw the impacts of these restrictions firsthand when I visited Yemen in March. Intergovernorate movements of our Yemeni female colleagues were denied in Houthi-controlled areas in the absence of a male guardian, limiting our engagement with women and girls. In areas controlled by the government of Yemen, insecurity and fragmented administrative requirements, including the approval of sub-agreements, continue to delay our response. And lastly, we continue to struggle with a concerning deficit in funding for the 2024 humanitarian appeal. Despite extensive work by the humanitarian community to prioritize the response and reduce the appeal from $4.3 billion in 2023 to $2.7 billion in 2024, the appeal is only 10% funded as we enter the second quarter of the year. Madam President, members of the Council, as we have previously briefed, the Council, the humanitarian community in Yemen, is transforming our response to adapt to the shifting realities in Yemen. This transformation is taking place in different ways. Please allow me to outline a few. We are promoting a locally driven response and more sustainable solutions for the people of Yemen, in close collaboration with our development partners and affected communities. We are reviewing the way we operate in Yemen to ensure we remain fit for purpose and able to meet emerging challenges. We are working to further improve targeting to better direct assistance to those in need. The United Nations World Food Programme's ongoing retargeting efforts, which I will discuss in more detail shortly, are indeed a critical first step. We are redoubling our efforts to ensure a principled and measured approach to humanitarian action and expand operational space, and actively advocating against politicization of our work. And we are pursuing more structured engagement with all parties and seeking systemic solutions to persisting challenges. Madam President, I would like to provide more detail about two particular issues that are most urgent to the humanitarian community today. One of them is cholera, and the other is food and nutrition insecurity. Since October last year, we have been seeing an alarming resurgence of cholera across the country. The last outbreak was in 2019. The response in government-controlled areas, led by the government with the support of the humanitarian community, has slowed the spread of the disease and ensured the availability of treatment for people affected. This work was boosted by a Yemen Humanitarian Fund allocation in November and generous donor support for the outbreak response. However, since March, we have seen the outbreak spread rapidly in areas controlled by the Houthi de facto authorities. As of 7 April, more than 11,000 suspected cases have been reported in these areas, with 75 associated deaths, compared with approximately 3,200 suspected cases in government-controlled areas, also since October. As shown by the success in curbing the outbreak in government-controlled areas, a rapid response is absolutely critical. The United Nations and our humanitarian partners are working closely with relevant authorities to scale up the response. However, emergency stocks of supplies, essential supplies, are almost depleted. Water and sanitation and hygiene support systems need urgent strengthening. We appeal to the international community to help us to fill these urgent gaps, including, of course, with critical funding and supplies. Madam President, we have repeatedly voiced our strong concerns about food and nutrition insecurity in Yemen this year. Ramadan and Eid festivities have seen some small, temporary, but welcome relief with zakat, Islamic charity obligations, remittances, and community led mechanisms, providing more people with access to essential items and the ability to purchase food in the markets. We expect food and nutrition security to worsen, though, further as the lean season begins in the coming weeks. Our efforts to address this situation continue apace. The World Food Programme's pilot retargeting exercise is now underway in Houthi-controlled areas, and we expect to see positive results by the end of the month. Until food assistance starts flowing, the humanitarian country team and its partners are doing what they can to mitigate the most severe impacts of the pause in general food distribution and protect the most vulnerable. Nutrition interventions will be scaled up in 34 districts assessed to be the worst affected, with the support of a $6 million allocation from the Yemen Humanitarian Fund. NGOs will distribute pre-positioned nutrition supplies in these districts. The needs, however, remain tremendous, and the United Nations and its partners require significantly more to keep hunger at bay. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, Yemen needs three things today. One, we must keep front of mind how easily progress achieved since the truce could be lost, and how much more there is to do in a complex operating environment. I urge the Security Council to redouble its efforts to secure lasting peace and stability in Yemen. Two, with food and malnutrition rates rising and the cholera outbreak quickly worsening, we must be able to act quickly to minimize suffering and prevent further deterioration of conditions. The active, united support of Council members is crucial to create an enabling environment to help us carry out this work. And finally, I urge Council members to do what they can to provide urgently needed funding to aid the program in Yemen, to ensure the well-being of millions of Yemeni and support the steps the humanitarian community is taking to improve the effectiveness of our response. In closing, allow me also to warmly wish Eid Mubarak to all those who celebrate in Yemen and around the world today. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Wasserna for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Wamid Shakir.
السيدة الرئيسة المعالي الأعضاء والعضوات
Madam President,
الحاضرون
Excellencies,
جميعا
ladies
أنا
and
وميد
gentlemen,
شاكر
my
رئيسة
name
مؤسسة
is
إطار
Wamid Shakir and I am
للتنمية
the chairwoman
الاجتماعية
of
وهي منظمة
the
غير
Itar
حكومية
Foundation for
يمنية
Social Development. It's
تعمل
a Yemeni
على تطوير
organization
قطاع المجتمع المدني
dedicated
من
to
أجل
promoting
تمكين
the
النساء والشباب بناء السلام
rights and
وتحقيق
participation of women
المساواة
and youth,
الاجتماعية.
building peace and achieving social and
أقف
gender
أمامكم
equality
اليوم
in
بقلب
the Yemeni
مثقل
civil society. I stand before you
ساعية
today with a heavy heart,
بجذب اهتمامكم إلى
pleading
الأزمة في اليمن
for your
التي
attention
طال
to the
أمدها
ongoing crisis in
بسبب
Yemen
الحرب
that has unfolded for so
وسببت
long
دمارا
because of the
كبيرا
war,
لكثير
causing
من
great
اليمنيين
devastation
وخاصة
to many Yemenis,
النساء والطفلات
particularly women,
والأطفال.
girls,
أود أن
and
أحدثكم اليوم
children.
عن 3 نقاط
I would
رئيسية.
like to focus
أولاً
on three main
آثار
points today.
الأزمة الإنسانية
First,
والاقتصادية
the
على حياة النساء
gendered
والأطفال
impact of the humanitarian and
وآثار
economic crisis and its
التغير
impact on
المناخي
children as well.
على حياة النساء
Second, the
والطفلات
impacts of climate
والأطفال
change,
كذلك ودور
particularly on
المجتمع
women, girls,
المدني
and
بما في
boys.
ذلك منظمات حقوق
And
المرأة
third, the role of civil
والمنظمات التي
society,
تقودها
including
النساء
women's rights and women-led
وأهمية
organizations,
مشاركتها
and the
الفاعلة
importance
في
of
عملية
their full,
السلام
equal,
والعملية
and
السياسية.
meaningful participation in the peace and political
السيدة
process.
الرئيسة تسبب النزاع
Madam
في اليمن
President, the
بأزمة
conflict in Yemen
إنسانية
has
مدمرة
unleashed a
تاركاً
devastating
17
humanitarian
مليون
crisis,
يمني
leaving 17
يعانون
million
من انعدام
Yemenis
الأمن الغذائي
suffering
بينما
from
يقف
food
6
insecurity,
ملايين منهم على عتبة
while
الجوع.
6 million are on the
تتحمل النساء
precipice of
والأطفال
famine.
وطأة هذه الأزمة.
Women and children
إذ
are bearing the
يشكلون
brunt of this
80%
crisis,
من
as
المحتاجين
they
إلى
comprise
المساعدات
almost
الإنسانية.
80% of those
في
in need of
الوقت
humanitarian
نفسه
assistance. In the meantime,
انخفضت قيمة العملة
the value of
مما
the currency
تسبب في
has dropped,
ارتفاع أسعار
thus
المواد
causing food
الغذائية
prices to
بأكثر من 300%
increase by over 300% and
للقمح
400%
فقط.
for wheat alone.
اليوم لا
Today,
تستطيع أكثر من نصف
more
الأسر
than
في اليمن
half
من توفير
of
الضروريات
households in Yemen
اليومية،
cannot afford
ويتفاقم وضعهم
daily
سوءا
necessities.
مع انقطاع التيار
Matters are made
الكهربائي
worse
وشح
because
المياه
of power
وتأخر
outages,
دفع الأجور.
water scarcity, and
يؤدي
unpaid
الانهيار
wages.
الاقتصادي إلى
The
إرهاق
economic
النساء
collapse
اليمنيات بشكل
disproportionately
مضاعف.
burdens Yemeni
فارتفاع
women.
الأسعار وارتفاع أسعار المواد الغذائية
Soaring
وتضاؤل
food
الموارد
prices
يجبر
and
النساء
dwindling
على
resources
تخطي الوجبات
are forcing
الغذائية
women
أو
to
بيع
skip meals or
ممتلكاتهن،
sell their belongings.
ويهدد سوء التغذية أكثر من
Malnutrition
مليون
threatens
ونصف امرأة
over
حامل
2.7
ومرضع.
million pregnant and
كما أن
breastfeeding women.
المحادثات المتوقفة للسلام
The
واستمرار
stalled
القتال
peace talks
يزيد من
and
تعقيد
the
الوضع،
ongoing fighting
وهناك
are
استبعاد
further
النساء
worsening the
عن
situation.
عمليات صنع
Women are
القرار،
being
فعلى
excluded from
الرغم
decision
من
making,
تحملهن
despite the fact that they bear
وطأة النزاع
the brunt of the conflict.
ليس لهن رأي بعد
Yet they
في
still
هذا
have
كله.
no voice in ending it.
تخطي الوجبات وتسرب
Skipping
الأطفال من
meals,
المدارس
children
والزواج
dropping out of
المبكر
school,
وعمالة الأطفال
child
والتسول
marriage,
كلها أمثلة
child labor,
بسيطة أو
and
قليلة
begging on
على
the streets
استراتيجيات التكيف
are some of the
الخطيرة
high-risk
التي
coping strategies
يلجأ
that
إليها
millions in
اليمنيون
Yemen have had
للبقاء على الحياة.
resort to survive.
اضطرت ملايين الفتيات إلى ترك
Millions of
الدراسة
girls have
للعمل
had
من أجل
to
توفير الطعام
drop out of school
لعائلاتهن.
to work and provide
من
food for
بين
their
10
families.
مليون و700
Out of
ألف طفل في سن
10.7 million
الدراسة يوجد
school-aged
4
children in
مليون
Yemen,
ونصف
4.5
طفل خارج
million
المدرسة،
children are out of
70
school,
منهم فتيات.
70% of whom
أما
are
الأطفال
girls.
النازحون فمعرضون
Displaced
للتسرب
children
من
are
المدرسة
twice as
بمعدل
likely to drop
الضعف
out
عن نظرائهم،
than their peers.
ويؤدي تسرب بالفتيات من التعليم إلى ارتفاع
The lack of
معدلات
access to
الزواج
education
المبكر
for girls
والقسري،
has
خاصة
raised
بين
the
الفتيات
rates of
النازحات،
forced
إذ
early child
تتزوج
marriage,
حاليا
particularly for
اليوم
displaced girls, where
واحدة
one
فتاة نازحة من كل
out of
5 في
5
سن 10
displaced girls
سنوات إلى 19 سنة،
is currently
وهو
married
عدد
between the ages of
أعلى
10 and
بكثير
19, which is
من
a
معدل
significantly
الزواج
higher
في
number
المجتمع
than the typical
المنوف.
marriage age in
إن
the host
توفير
community.
التمويل العاجل أمر ملح لمنع
Urgent
كارثة إنسانية وخيمة
funding
في
is
اليمن.
crucial in
على
preventing
المانحين دعم
a
المجتمع
humanitarian
المدني
catastrophe in Yemen.
المحلي لا سيما
Donors must support
المنظمات
local civil
النسائية
society, especially women's
بتمويل
rights groups,
طويل الأجل،
with long-term
ذلك
funding.
لتعزيز قدرة القادة
This
المحليين
empowers
على
local
الوصول إلى
leaders.
الفئة. السيدة الرئيسة،
Madam
يضيف
President,
تغير المناخ طبقة أخرى من
climate
الدمار
change
إلى
adds
الكارثة
another
الإنسانية،
layer of
وتبرز
devastation to
آثار
the
تغير
humanitarian
المناخ على
catastrophe.
اليمن في انعدام الأمن
Yemen's
الغذائي
vulnerability to
وشح
climate
المياه
change
والنزوح،
translates into food
يهدد
insecurity, water
هطول الأمطار
scarcity, and
غير
displacement.
المنتظمة،
Erratic
وارتفاع
rainfall
درجات
patterns,
الحرارة
rising
وانخفاض مستويات
temperatures,
المياه
and
الجوفية
declining
الأمن
groundwater levels
الغذائي
threaten food
لملايين
security
الأشخاص
for
الذين
millions
يعتمدون
who
على
rely
الزراعة في
on
معيشتهم.
agriculture for their
ثلث المياه
livelihoods.
الجوفية
A
والسطحية
third of
في
Yemen's
اليمن على
groundwater
وشك
and surface
النضوب،
water is on the
حيث
verge of
تصل آبار
depletion.
المياه إلى عمق يزيد عن
Water
700
wells
متر.
are reaching depths of
يؤثر
over
هذا
700
بشكل
meters.
مضاعف على
All of this
النساء والفتيات
disproportionately
اللاتي
affects women
يلعبن
and girls
دورا
who
رئيسيا
play
في
a
إنتاج
crucial
الغذاء
role in food
وجمع
production
المياه
and household
لاحتياجات
water
المنزل.
collection and
ناهيك
management.
حقيقة أن النساء يملكن أقل من 1%
Moreover,
من
women own
الأراضي
less than
الزراعية
1%
وبالتالي المياه،
of
فهذا
farming land and
يعيق من
thus water, and
قدرتهن
this
على
hinders their
التكيف
ability to
مع
adapt
تغير المناخ
to climate
والوصول
change
إلى الموارد.
and access resources.
في
In
2023
2023,
تأثر بتغير المياه تغير المناخ أكثر من
climate
300,000
change
شخص
affected over
في اليمن،
300,000 people in
معظمهم
Yemen,
من النازحين
most of
الذين
whom
فروا
are
من
IDPs who had
مناطق
fled
النزاع ثم فقدوا
conflict areas
مأواهم
and then lost their
ودخلهم وسبل
shelters,
عيشهم.
income, and any
هذا ما
form of
يفعله
livelihood.
تغير المناخ في اليمن
This is
في
what
ظل
climate
الأزمة
change does
الحالية،
in Yemen in light
يفاقم
of the current
النزوح
crisis. It
ويجبر
exacerbates
الملايين على
displacement.
ترك
It forces
منازلهم
millions to flee their
بحثا
homes
عن
in
الماء
search of
والغذاء
water,
والأمان.
food, and
هناك
safety.
4.5 مليون
4.5
يمني نازح
million
بسبب
Yemenis are
الكوارث
internally
الطبيعية،
displaced
إلا
due
أن
to
النساء
natural
والفتيات هن
disasters.
الأكثر
Women and
تأثرا
girls
بتغير
are
المناخ، كذلك
affected
العنف
more than others
والأمراض.
by climate
في
change,
مؤسسة
violence,
إطار
and disease. At the
عملنا
ITAR
مؤخراً
Foundation,
مع
we have recently
640
worked with
مع 460 امرأة نازحة
460
وعلمنا
internally displaced
منهن
women
أن طفح المجاري
who informed us that
والمستنقعات
sewage
والأمطار
overflow,
الغزيرة
swamps, heavy
والفيضانات
rainfall, flooding,
والتلوث
and
الصناعي
industrial
وخاصة
pollution,
من قبل
especially
شركات النفط
from oil
هي أكثر
companies,
القضايا
are the most
شيوعاً في مناطقهن.
frequent issues
تضطر
and
المجتمعات
problems in
وخاصة
the areas,
النساء إلى
communities,
اعتماد
especially
آليات
women, are
تكيف
forced
سلبية
to adopt
للبقاء على
negative
قيد
coping
الحياة مثل
mechanisms to
تقليل
survive,
الإنفاق على
such as
الاحتياجات
reducing
الصحية
spending on health
والنزوح
needs,
إلى أماكن أكثر أماناً
being forcibly
واللجوء إلى
displaced to
الاضطراب.
safer places,
قالت هؤلاء
and
النسوة إن
resorting to
جل ما
borrowing.
يتطلعن إليه
These women
هو
said
ثلاثة
that
أمور:
their three
المأوى،
highest
الخدمات
aspirations were
المستدامة والسلام
shelter,
الدائم.
more sustainable
على
services,
الرغم من
and the
آثاره
lasting peace.
المدمرة لا تعتبر السلطات
Despite
تغير
the
المناخ
devastating effects,
أولوية.
authorities do not consider
يتطلب
climate change a
التخفيف
priority.
من آثار تغير المناخ
Mitigating the effects
برامج
of climate
تنموية
change requires
طويلة الأجل
long-term development
وتمويل
programs.
وفير
It
وخبرات
requires abundant
متخصصة.
funding and
في كل
specialized
هذا غائب
expertise,
تقريبا
all of which are almost
ويستحيل
entirely
تحقيقه في
absent
ظل النزاع
and impossible to
والهشاشة
achieve in the
السياسية القائمة في
shadow
اليمن.
of the conflict
على
and
الرغم
political
من أن
fragility of the
الخطط
country.
الوطنية للتكيف المناخي
Although existing climate
تعترف
change
بالحاجة إلى
adaptation
مشاركة
plans do
المجتمع
recognize the
المدني
need
والمجتمعات
for civil
المحلية
society and
إلا
local
أنها
community
تفتقر إلى
engagement,
آليات
they
تنفيذ
lack
مستجيبة للنوع الاجتماعي والشباب.
gender and
من
use responsive
الضروري أن تعكس
implementation
السياسات
mechanisms.
والمشاريع الرامية
It is
إلى معالجة
imperative
تغير
that
المناخ
policies,
احتياجات
strategies, and
النساء
projects to
والفتيات
address climate
وخبرتهن
change
وتطلعاتهن
reflect
في
the
هذا
needs,
المجال.
expertise, and aspirations
السيدة
of women
الرئيسة،
and girls.
تلعب النساء
Madam
دورا
President,
حاسما في بناء
women
السلام
play a
والتماسك
critical role in
الاجتماعي،
peace building
إلا
and
أن
social cohesion,
أصواتهن مفقودة
yet their
من
voices are
على
missing
طاولة صنع القرار.
from the
أطراف
decision-making
التفاوض لديهم
table.
سجل
The
محبط
negotiating parties
فيما
have a
يتعلق
dismal record
بإشراك
when
النساء.
it comes to women's
ومن
inclusion.
المثير للقلق أن
Alarmingly,
تمثيل النساء
the
يتراجع
representation
على
of
جميع
women is
المستويات
declining
وما
at all
تزال
levels, and their
مشاركتهن في عملية
participation
السلام
in the
ضئيلة.
peace process remains
فتمثيل النساء
negligible.
منخفض أو
Women are
منعدم في الكيانات
underrepresented in
السياسية
the political
للحكومة
entities of the
والأحزاب
government
السياسية
and
وكذلك في
political
عملية
parties,
صد النزاع على المستويين
as well as
الإقليمي
those
والعالمي.
engaged in the conflicts
بالإضافة فإن
at
قيادة
regional and
النساء
global levels.
داخل منظمات المجتمع المدني
Women's leadership
منخفضة
within
أيضا
civil society
وتواجه
organizations is also
صعوبات في الوصول
low,
إلى
and they
التمويل وتنمية
face
القدرات.
difficulties in accessing
المجتمع اليمني
funding
خاصة
and
المنظمات
capacity
النسائية هو العمود
building.
الفقري للجهود
Civil
الإنسانية
society,
والتنموية
especially women's
والسلام.
rights and
تقدم
women-led
هذه
organizations, are the
المنظمات
backbone of Yemeni
المساعدة
humanitarian
الإنسانية
peace and
الأساسية
development efforts.
وتدعو
They
إلى
provide
سلام شامل
essential
وعادل
humanitarian
وتمكن
assistance.
النساء
They
والشباب.
advocate for
ومع
just and
ذلك
inclusive
فإن
peace,
مجال
and
عملهم
empower women and
يتقلص
youth.
يوما بعد
However,
يوم
their
حيث
space
يؤدي
is
استمرار
shrinking
النزاع
by the
والقيود
day.
على
The ongoing
الحركة
conflict
والانخفاض
and
الحاد في
restrictions of
التمويل
movement
إلى
and the
تطوير
sharp decline in
مساهمتهم.
funding
إن
further
إعطاء
undermine
الأولوية
their
للمساواة
crucial
بين الجنسين
contributions.
والقيادة
Therefore, it is
المحلية
crucial
للمرأة
to
اليمنية في
prioritize
الجهود
gender
الإنسانية
equality and local
والتنموية
women's leadership
وبناء
in
السلام هو أمر
humanitarian
ضروري.
development and peace-building efforts.
السيدة
Madam President,
الرئيسة، اليمنيون واليمنيات هم في
Yemeni
أمس
men
الحاجة
and
اليوم
women
إلى سلام
desperately
دائم
need
يحمي
a
حقوق
lasting
الإنسان.
peace that
إن
protects their
تجديد
human
الجهود
rights.
نحو بناء السلام واعتبار دور المجتمع المدني
Renewed efforts
والمنظمات النسائية
towards peace
في
building
مقدمة
are
صفوف
crucial,
بناة
with civil
السلام
society and women's rights
أمر مهم
organizations
للغاية
at
وبه
the
يمهد
forefront.
الطريق لمستقبل
This can
آمن
pave the
لجميع
way for a
اليمنيين.
secure future for
وعليه
all Yemenis.
أحث مجلس الأمن
Therefore,
على
I urge the
واحد
Security Council
دعوة
to do the
جميع
following.
الأطراف إلى احترام وحماية
Call on all
حقوق
parties to
الإنسان
respect and
لجميع
protect
اليمنيين
the human rights of
واليمنيات
all
وفقا
Yemeni men and
للقانون
women
الدولي. مساعدة
in
الدول
accordance with
الأعضاء في الأمم
international law.
المتحدة بشأن حقوق
Hold
المرأة
the United Nations member
وأطر المرأة
states
والشباب
to
والسلام
account for
والأمن
upholding
وتوفير
principles and
بيئة
rights-based
تمكن المجتمع
frameworks around
المدني من
women, peace and
المشاركة في صنع
security,
قرارات
and youth peace
السلام
and
والأمن
security,
على جميع
contributing to
المستويات لضمان
inclusive peace
المشاركة
processes
الفاعلة
that guarantee
لجميع
the full,
اليمنيين.
equal, and meaningful
حث الجهات
participation of all
المانحة على
Yemenis,
تمويل خطة
including women
الاستجابة
and youth.
الإنسانية
Urge
بشكل
donors to
عاجل
fund a
وكامل
humanitarian
في اليمن
response plan
مع
urgently and
توفير
fully in
تمويل
Yemen with
مباشر
direct, flexible, and
ومرن
multi-year
متعدد
funding
السنوات للمنظمات
to women's
النسائية.
rights and
حث
women-led
جميع الأطراف على
organizations.
اتخاذ خطوات
Urge all
ملموسة
parties
لمعالجة
to the
الأزمة
conflict to take
الاقتصادية
concrete steps
المستمرة
to address the
والتخفيف
ongoing
من
economic
حدة
crisis,
الفقر
alleviate
والحفاظ على
poverty,
كرامة
and
الشعب
preserve the
اليمني.
dignity of the
حث
Yemeni
الأطراف
people.
في اليمن على رفع
Urge
جميع
the
القيود
parties in
المفروضة
Yemen
على
to lift
حركة
all
النساء
restrictions
اليمنيات
on the movement of
والعاملات
Yemeni
في
women
المجال الإنساني وفي بناء السلام
and female
ويشمل هذا
workers in
تسهيل عمل
humanitarian and
المنظمات المحلية
peace-building
والدولية.
areas. This
حث
includes
جميع
facilitating the
أطراف
work of local
النساء
and
في اليمن
international
على
organizations.
معالجة أزمة
Urge all
المناخ
parties to the conflict
بشكل
in Yemen
ملموس
to
من خلال
address
تعزيز
the
الحكم
climate
الرشيد
crisis,
وبناء القدرات
including by
المؤسسية
enhancing good governance,
وتمكين
building
ومشاركة
institutional
المجتمع
capacity, and
المدني.
empowering civil society
شكرا لكم.
participation. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Shaki for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And let me start by thanking Special Envoy Grunberg and Director Wasunu for your briefings. And I'm also grateful to Ms. Shakir for highlighting the connections between climate, peace and security, as well as the stark humanitarian situation. As you said, and we've heard, Yemen faces stark environmental challenges on top of the ongoing conflict. And addressing these environmental challenges now as part of any discussion for peace will be critical to Yemen's future sustainability. We also share Director Wasonu and Ms. Shakir's concerns about the humanitarian situation in Yemen, and in particular, the access constraints preventing women aid workers from delivering vital assistance. We reiterate our call for all parties to facilitate unhindered access for humanitarian workers and welcome OCHA's proposals for adaptive measures, which Ms. Wasonu has just outlined. The UK has given over $1.2 billion in humanitarian aid since the crisis started. We gave $110 million last year, and we expect to increase our contribution this year. We also continue to support fully the ongoing efforts of the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg to progress a roadmap towards UN-led Yemeni dialogue. As we've said before, an inclusive political settlement is the only way to bring sustainable peace and long-term stability to Yemen and address the worsening humanitarian crisis. President, we unequivocally condemn the Iranian strikes against Israel over the weekend, which have done nothing to advance prospects for peace in Gaza. The UK has long been clear about Iran's unacceptable role in destabilizing the region, including their role in supporting the Houthis in Yemen. We understand the Houthis contributed to this latest attack. Their reckless actions continue to risk seriously undermining efforts to bring peace to the Yemeni people. The Houthis continue to risk further escalation with their ongoing attacks against shipping in the Red Sea. This Council has been clear. In its adoption of UNSCR 2722 on the 10th of January, that we condemn Houthi attacks. They threaten innocent lives, endanger aid delivery to Yemen and the region. We also reaffirm our condemnation of the attack on a home in Radar last month by the Houthis. This attack led to a tragic loss of life and injury, and we express our deepest condolences to the families of those killed and injured. Furthermore, the decision to issue counterfeit currency in Yemen threatens to destabilize the banking sector and deepen division in the country's already fragile economy. Finally, President, we call on the Houthis to prioritize the interests of the Yemeni people, to engage with UN efforts to resolve economic fragmentation, and to cease provocations in order to preserve space for an intra-Yemeni peace process. In short, we call on the Houthis to stop attacks and to return to the peace talks. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+ members, namely Algeria, Guyana, Mozambique, and my country, Sierra Leone. We thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Director Idem Wosono for their briefings. We also thank Ms. Wamne Sakir for the information provided. The A3+ reiterates its support for the resumption of a Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned peace process based on the agreed references for political settlement. The attainment of an inclusive nationwide ceasefire is thus an imperative for the peace process to thrive. This is a priority that must be pursued. In this vein, sustained initiatives and the mutual exchange of prisoners, for instance, can rekindle efforts to build confidence and leverage the parties to honor their commitment to the peace process. We are of the view that the Special Envoy's vision for a bottom-up approach in canvassing much-needed support from the relevant stakeholders will serve as a linchpin in the mediation efforts. The facilitating role of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Sultanate of Oman, and the active involvement of the parties, civil society, women's group, and the youth are crucial to achieving this aspiration. We call on the parties not to allow the escalating situation in the Red Sea to deviate attention from effectively implementing the peace process. We urge the Houthis to resume their engagement and to participate constructively in the ongoing efforts led by the Special Envoy and other regional and international initiatives to successfully implement the peace process. Concrete gains made by the government and the Houthis, such as the opening of roads in the Thais Governorate, are key to cementing future collaborations. Furthermore, we call on the Houthis to refrain from any measures that may negatively impact economic activities in Yemen, and for them to provide assurances that allow traders the freedom to import commodities through all Yemeni ports. Facilitating free movement of goods will significantly contribute to mitigate the humanitarian crisis and allow the government to adequately fulfill its duties for the benefit of all Yemeni people, including through the payment of salaries. Madam President, Yemen is faced with a dire humanitarian situation with increased food insecurity and malnutrition. In government-controlled areas, the number of people receiving aid and the size of food rations have reduced. However, humanitarian needs remain widespread. According to the World Food Programme, 18.6 million Yemenis would need humanitarian assistance in 2024, and 17 million people are food insecure. The WFP estimates that it will need 2.9 billion in 2024 to meet those needs. We therefore welcome the CRF allocation of 7 million last month to bridge the WFP funding gap and tackle urgent food security and malnutrition challenges in Yemen. The A3+ therefore calls on the international community, the non-traditional donors such as philanthropic organizations, to scale up funding to support the effort of the WFP to cover the remaining 100 million funding gap so that the organization could resume and sustain food distribution across Yemen. We also call for the establishment of sustainable financing programs that will stimulate economic growth and support small and medium-sized enterprises, including through enhanced support for women-owned businesses and facilitate trade between the North and South, such as women-led microcredit schemes. Madam President, the A3+ members are appalled by the attack against civilians and the destruction of residential homes in Rada, in the Al-Bayada Governorate during the holy month of Ramadan that resulted in 12 deaths and 35 injuries. The A3+ calls for the cessation of the Houthis' military attack in different areas in Yemen, including the attacks on commercial and merchant vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The A3+ further calls for assurances for the safety of ships that are carrying humanitarian aid and foodstuffs to Yemen ports to alleviate the humanitarian crisis faced by the people of Yemen. The A3+ stresses the need to address the root causes of the conflict and calls all concerned actors to exercise maximum restraint and for them to prioritize political and diplomatic means over military options to resolve the conflict to ensure lasting peace in Yemen and the region. In conclusion, Madam President, it is imperative to avoid a regional spillover of the Gaza conflict and to de-escalate tensions in the wider region of the Middle East, including in Yemen. We call on all relevant stakeholders to build on efforts for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The people of Yemen deserve a united country that is in peace and thriving economically. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone, and I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you, and thanks also to today's briefers, Special Envoy Grunberg, Executive Director for SORNO, and Ms. Shakir. I also note the presence of the Yemeni ambassador today with us. President, I begin by once again stating Slovenia's commitment to long-term peace in Yemen and our support to the ongoing UN efforts to that end. The vision of the Special Envoy for the ceasefire and the roadmap leading to an inclusive political process in Yemen is the best possible chance for achieving peace after 9 long years of war. We must not lose sight of the ultimate aim. We call on all parties to engage constructively with the special envoys and to prioritize de-escalation and dialogue at a very fragile time for Yemen and the region in the turmoil of the catastrophe unfolding in Gaza. We reiterate our support to the internationally recognized government of Yemen and congratulate His Excellency Zindani on his appointment as Foreign Minister. We furthermore emphasize the importance of an effective and united Presidential Leadership Council. All parties must actively prepare for an intra-Yemeni political process, which we hope can commence in the very near future. The process in which women will fully, equally, and meaningfully participate. And we once again clearly call for the immediate cessation of Houthis' attack, which have continued in the Red Sea and which undermine peace efforts as demanded in Resolution 2722. The attacks reported against civilian homes in Al-Bayara governorate in recent weeks are also deeply shocking and should fully be investigated. President, we have heard today that humanitarian needs in Yemen remain alarmingly high. While Ramadan brought some respite, food insecurity and malnutrition have surged in recent months, posing a real threat to the lives and well-being of millions of Yemenis, particularly women and children. Ensuring that humanitarian aid is available and accessible is the foremost priority. We welcome the commencing of a pilot targeting exercise by the World Food Programme and hope that it will be possible to resume broader food distribution soon. We reiterate our strong support to the work of OCHA and agencies on the ground, as well as for UNWIM, which is crucial in ensuring Yemenis have access to the food they so desperately need. Meeting Yemen's humanitarian needs is a necessary first step that has to be followed by long-term sustainable solutions underpinned by lasting peace. President, our civil society briefer today has made abundantly clear that climate change is exacerbating an already dire humanitarian situation, affecting the availability of critical resources for Yemenis, displacing them time and time again, and driving local level tensions and conflict. As we fast approach the rainy season, we know that Yemenis, like Ms. Shakir, are once again fearing terrible flooding, like we have witnessed in recent years. Meanwhile, every drop of water is precious in Yemen, one of the world's most water-scarce countries. Regrettably, the absence of appropriate infrastructure means rainwater is not harvested for water supply. This is why the European Union is supporting sustainable initiatives on the ground to improve water access and humanitarian efforts which prioritize emergency preparedness and response. We call on the government of Yemen to ensure that its policies, including at the local level, are inclusive and sensitive to natural resource management and the many climate and water-related challenges the country is facing. President, in conclusion, we hope that the political will of all actors in Yemen and much-needed de-escalation in the region, the momentum needed to once again move forward on the path to peace in Yemen can soon be restored. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia, and I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. To begin, I also would like to thank Special Envoy Grundberg, Director Worston of OCHA, and Ms. Shakir, the founder of ITAR Foundation, for their briefings today. These briefings helps inform our understanding of recent development in Yemen on the ground. Madam President, our efforts to advance a political solution in Yemen have slowed since last October, despite the Special Envoy's continuous endeavors for political settlement in Yemen. The situation on the Red Sea impacts our endeavors to achieve peace in Yemen and is intensively affected by the recent elevated tensions in the broader region. Escalation in a broader region is very acute at this moment. Regrettably, the Houthis are aggravating the tension further beyond the Red Sea. We recall that the special envoy urged a reset on the calculation on the Yemeni questions. But again, regrettably, there has been no major change in Yemen over the last month. While progress has stalled, as briefer said, civilians continue to suffer due to ongoing security and an economic crisis, in addition to environmental issues recently. My delegation reiterates its consistent commitment for the support for the UN Special Envoy and notes the vital importance of full implementation of Resolution 2722 by all member states. To assist our overall efforts, the Sanctions Committee on Yemen will keep closely monitoring the sanctions regime, in particular, the arms embargo under Resolution 2216, with the support and the cooperation of the panel of experts on Yemen. Madam President, besides the political and security situation in Yemen, we must also take note of the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Yemen. The overall picture remains deeply concerning, given that humanitarian agencies are short of funds. Malnutrition figures remain high, in particular for children under age 2. Food insecurity and lack of nutrition jeopardize the survival of vulnerable groups in the country, especially in Houthi-controlled area. I also listened very seriously on the briefings of the cholera outbreak in Yemen. In this regard, my delegation has high expectations for the WFP pilot exercise to provide relief to the hardships the Yemeni people are facing, which would be estimated to aggravate until August. Madam President, economic issues are inherently interconnected with the security issues, as the Houthis have attempted to deter the government's oil production, which has in turn worsened the government's financial capacity to pay civil servants. With contradictory economic policies by both sides, the viability of the economy itself is being negatively impacted. As such, we need to advance solutions to resolve this. Madam President, we have noted environmental issues currently ensuing in Yemen, including Ruby Mara case in March on the Red Sea. The briefing from the civil society today also helped us understand the imminent missions we should take in Yemen. Environmental issues cannot be lessened by excluding key civil society stakeholders, and also it needs cooperation from the international community. We commend the UN in dispatching its experts of examining the sunken Ruby Mara. Member states and the UN should maintain sharp focus on the environmental issues ensuing in Yemen continuously. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea. Now I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Special Envoy Grunberg and OCHA Director Wasornu and Ms. Shakir for your briefings. I also welcome the Permanent Representative of Yemen to this meeting. At the outset, I would like to congratulate His Excellency Shea Mohsen Al-Zindani on his appointment as Yemen's Foreign Minister. We welcome his commitment to Yemen's unity and to reviving a UN-led Yemeni political process that consults civil society and is aimed at bringing the Yemen conflict to an end. The Houthis' reckless attacks in the Red Sea and the worsening situation for the Yemeni people caused by Houthi actions continue to be alarming and undermine the prospects for peace in Yemen. U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, Lenderking, traveled to Saudi Arabia and Oman earlier this month to continue the United States' intensive diplomatic efforts to halt the attacks in the Red Sea. In addition to the impacts on global shipping, these continued Houthi attacks also impede the delivery of humanitarian assistance to 11.2 million Yemenis and to people in dire need in other countries. Tightening supplies and skyrocketing freight and insurance prices translate directly into rising costs for the Yemeni people. In carrying out these attacks, the Houthis are trying to distract attention from their many failures and human rights abuses putting their own interests ahead of those of average Yemenis. In addition to the attacks in the Red Sea, attacks on Yemenis are continuing. The Houthis continue to lay siege to the city of Taiz, restricting water access and repeatedly firing sniper rounds into the city, killing and injuring children. We were disturbed by clashes last month in the capital after Houthi forces reportedly forced worshippers at a mosque to listen to their televised propaganda instead of traditional prayers. We were also disturbed by reports that the so-called Houthi courts sentenced 9 people to death earlier this year on dubious charges of sodomy, with punishments including crucifixion and stoning. The group's ongoing cruel detention of members of vulnerable religious minority communities is unacceptable. Colleagues, the grim reality is that the Houthis are not only willing to condemn millions of men, women, and children in Yemen to hunger to advance their Iran-backed agenda, but they are also willing to use violence and terror for control. We must continue our efforts to demand the Houthis cease their attacks consistent with Resolution 2722. We must also do more to underscore the Council's concern regarding the Iranian origin of weapons used by the Houthis and the ongoing violations of the arms embargo. It is no secret that Iran provides weapons to the Houthis in violation of the UN arms embargo. And so we repeat our call for Iran to stop these illegal weapons transfers and to stop all activities that facilitate the Houthis' reckless attacks. Iran's continuous efforts to foment instability and terror in the region, as demonstrated through this weekend's unprecedented attacks by Iran against the State of Israel, need to be strongly condemned by this Council. Madam President, the United States reiterates its request that the Secretary General's monthly report submitted to the Council in accordance with Resolution 2722 include information regarding the types of weapons used in each incident and, where appropriate, the likely origin of these weapons. Ongoing violations should not be tolerated. Member states should identify and designate violators for sanctions, and the Security Council should strengthen existing mechanisms and authorities to address escalating violence in the Red Sea. We look forward to continued discussions about the ways to strengthen UNVIM's capacity to inspect vessels bound for Houthi-controlled ports to ensure compliance with the arms embargo and prevent the import of weapons. We also look forward to the Yemen panel of experts' upcoming report and hope to address their findings and recommendations in a future meeting. Despite these regional and domestic challenges, we continue to believe that negotiations toward an inclusive Yemeni peace process under UN auspices ultimately remain the best path to stability, one that we hope could lead to a durable end to the conflict while addressing Yemeni calls for justice, accountability, and redress for human rights abuses and violations. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you,
Je
Madam
remercie
President. I
l'envoyé
would like to
spécial Hans
thank
Grunberg et
Special
la
Envoy
directrice
Hans
pour les
Grunberg and
opérations
OCHA Director of
et le plaidoyer
Operations
d'OCHA,
and
Edem
Advocacy,
Bozornou de leurs
Edem
exposés.
Basonu for their
Et je souhaite
briefings.
également la
And I also
bienvenue
wish to
à Madame
welcome
Vamet
Madame
Shakir et
Varmid
salue son engagement
Shakir
résolu
and
en faveur
to
de la
applaud
population
her
yéménite.
resolute commitment to the
Madame la
Yemeni people.
Présidente, le
Madam
26 mars
President, on the
dernier, une
26th of
soixantaine
March
d'organisations de la
last, some
société
60
civile
civil
nous
society
rappelaient à travers un
organizations
communiqué que
reminded
4
us through
Yéménites
a
sur 5
statement
étaient
that 4
actuellement
out of 5
confrontés à la
Yemenis
pauvreté.
are currently
Il s'agit d'une
experiencing
situation
poverty.
vécue par
This is a
Entisar Kara,
situation
une
experienced
femme de
by
35
Entisar
ans
Kara, a
originaire d'Al-Sawad
35-year-old
dans le
woman from
gouvernorat
Al-Sawad
de Damar.
in the governorate of
Malgré les
Damar.
nombreux obstacles
Despite
qui
the
jalonnent son
many
quotidien,
obstacles in her daily life,
Entisar assure
Entisar
qu'elle ne
assures
cessera,
us
je
that
cite,
she will, and I
jamais
quote,
d'aspirer à une
never
vie
stop
meilleure.
striving for
Faisant
a
écho
better
à ces
life.
paroles empreintes
Echoing these
d'optimisme, la
optimistic
Suisse
words,
souhaite mettre en avant les
Switzerland
éléments
wishes to
suivants.
highlight the following points.
Premièrement, nous
Firstly,
appelons à la
we call
préservation des
for
acquis
the
dans les discussions
preservation
de paix au
of
Yémen
gains
et
made in the
réaffirmons
peace talks in
l'importance
Yemen.
qu'elles se
We reaffirm the
concrétisent
importance of
rapidement.
these talks
Les
being
parties
brought
doivent
to a rapid and
s'abstenir de
concrete
toutes actions
fruition.
pouvant
The
mettre en
parties
péril
must
la mise
refrain
en
from
œuvre de
any
la feuille de
actions
route,
that could
y
jeopardize
compris
the
les
implementation
mesures
of the
financières
roadmap,
affectant la
including
santé économique
financial
du pays.
measures affecting the
Nous
country's economic
réaffirmons à cet
health.
égard
In this
l'importance de
regard, we
l'exercice des droits et des libertés
reaffirm
de
the
navigation en
importance
mer
of the
Rouge.
exercise of the rights
Nous
and freedoms of
condamnons toute
navigation in the
attaque
Red
contre les
Sea.
navires
We
marchands
condemn all
et
attacks
appelons à
on
la la
merchant
libération
vessels,
immédiate
we
des
call
25
for the
membres
immediate release of
d'équipage
the
du
25
Galaxy Leader.
crew members
Les
of the
crimes
Galaxy
récemment
Leader. The
perpétrés à
crimes
Rada
recently
attestent
perpetrated in
du prix
Rada
élevé
attest to
payé
the
par la
high
population civile
price paid
en
by
raison de cette spirale
civilians
conflictuelle.
as a consequence of
En
this
outre,
conflict
nous
spiral.
souhaitons réitérer notre appel
Furthermore,
lancé hier
we
dans
wish
cette
to
enceinte.
reiterate the appeal
La
we made
spirale de
yesterday in this
l'escalade doit
chamber.
s'arrêter immédiatement.
Namely, the
Toutes les
spiraling
attaques
escalation
doivent
must stop
cesser, tant en
immediately.
mer Rouge
All
qu'au
attacks
Yémen.
must
La
stop both
région
in
ne
the
doit
Red
pas
Sea and
sombrer
in
dans un
Yemen.
conflit
The
encore plus
region
vaste et
must not
meurtrier.
sink
Alors
into
que
an
nous sommes
even
face à une
broader and
situation
deadlier
humanitaire
conflict
catastrophique à
at a
Gaza.
time when we are
La
facing a
désescalade doit
catastrophic
être la
humanitarian
priorité.
situation in Gaza.
Deuxièmement,
De-escalation must be
nous
the
relevons avec
priority.
inquiétude que
Secondly, we
l'environnement
note with
humanitaire au
concern
Yémen
that the
devient
humanitarian
toujours plus
environment in
complexe et
Yemen is
dangereux.
becoming ever more
Nous
complex
saluons
and
dans ce
dangerous.
contexte
In
l'engagement
this
du personnel
context, we
humanitaire
welcome the
et onusien,
commitment of
y compris
UN
le
and
personnel
humanitarian
national et
personnel,
recruté
including
localement,
national and
et
recruited,
rappelons qu'il est
locally
protégé
recruited
par le
staff.
droit
And we recall that
international
they are
humanitaire.
protected
Nous
under
l'avons entendu à
IHL.
l'instant
As
par
we have just
l'intermédiaire de la
heard
haute
from the High
représentante d'OCHA.
Representative of
La
OCHA,
situation
the
économique au
economic
Yémen
situation
a de
in
graves
Yemen is
répercussions
having
sur la
grave
sécurité
repercussions
alimentaire
on
et la
food
malnutrition.
security and
Nous ne pouvons
malnutrition.
pas rester les
We
bras
cannot
croisés.
stand idly
Enfin,
by.
nous nous inquiétons de la
Finally, we are
recrudescence des
concerned
cas
by
de
the
choléra
uptick
et
in
rappelons
cholera
l'importance
cases.
d'investir dans
We
des projets
reiterate the importance
d'assainissement.
of investments in sanitation
Troisièmement,
projects.
le changement
Third,
climatique
climate
aggrave les
change is
vulnérabilités sociales et
exacerbating the
politiques
social and
qui
political
affectent déjà le Yémen.
vulnerabilities
Les
already
catastrophes
afflicting Yemen.
naturelles ont
Natural
poussé plus de
disasters
700
have
000 personnes
displaced
à se
more than
déplacer depuis 2008,
700,000
contribuant ainsi
people
à
since
augmenter les tensions
2008,
autour de l'eau,
thereby
la
increasing
nourriture ou les services
tensions
de
around
base
water,
dans les
food,
régions
and
d'accueil.
basic services
Une étude
in
récente
host
d'une
regions.
ONG
A recent
yéménite
study
financée
by
par
a
la
Yemeni
Suisse
from
a
a Yemeni
démontré que
NGO
plus de la
financed
moitié
by
des
Switzerland
personnes déjà
has shown
déplacées
that more than
ont dû
half of the
changer
people
d'abri à cause des
already
catastrophes
displaced have had
naturelles.
to change
De plus, les
shelter because
facteurs
of
de
natural
stress comme les
disasters.
sécheresses
In
et
addition,
inondations
stress factors such
continuent à
as droughts
s'intensifier
and
avec le
floods
changement
continue
climatique,
to intensify with
provoquant des
climate
pertes
change,
agricoles
and they
et
are causing
exacerbant l'insécurité
agricultural
des moyens de
losses and
subsistance.
exacerbating
Dans ce
livelihood
contexte, la Suisse
insecurity.
souhaite relever le
Against
rôle
this
essentiel
backdrop,
joué
we
par
wish
les
to
femmes
highlight
dans
the critical
l'atténuation
role
des
played by
tensions liées
women
aux
in
ressources naturelles.
alleviating
Le
tensions
Conseil doit
linked to
soutenir
natural
ces efforts dans
resources.
le
The
cadre de son
Council should
mandat et
support
s'assurer de
these
la bonne
efforts within the
collaboration
framework
entre
of
les
its
entités
mandate and
onusiennes
ensure
présentes au
smooth
Yémen.
cooperation between UN
Madame la
entities
Présidente,
present
le
in
tableau
Yemen.
qui nous a été
Madam
dressé
President,
aujourd'hui
the
doit
picture
nous
that has been
inviter à
painted
redoubler
today should
d'efforts.
encourage
La
us to
population
redouble
yéménite peut
our
compter sur le
efforts.
plein
The
soutien
Yemeni
de la
people can
Suisse.
count
Je
on the
vous
full
remercie.
support of Switzerland.
I
Thank
thank
you.
the representative of Switzerland, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President.
Agradezco la información proporcionada
I
por los
welcome the
ponentes y
information
doy la
provided
bienvenida
by the
al representante
briefers, and
permanente
I
de Yemen a
welcome
esta
the
sesión.
permanent representative of Yemen to
El
this
Ecuador
meeting.
sigue con preocupación el
Ecuador remains
impacto que el
concerned
escalamiento de
about
las
the
hostilidades en
impact
el
which
Mar
the
Rojo
escalation
tiene
of
en la
hostilities in the
situación
Red Sea
humanitaria en Yemen,
has on the
considerada
humanitarian
como una de las
situation in
mayores
Yemen,
crisis a nivel global.
considered to be one of the
Como lo ha advertido
largest
la
global
FAO
crises.
en el reporte
As
reciente,
FAO warned
de
in a recent
mantenerse la
report,
irrupción del transporte
if
marítimo en el Mar
maritime
Rojo,
transportation in
la
the Red
situación de
Sea
inseguridad
continues to be
alimentaria en Yemen,
disrupted,
en donde
the
5 millones
food
de personas
insecurity
ya sufren de
situation in
inseguridad
Yemen, where
alimentaria aguda,
5 million people are
continuará
already suffering
deteriorándose.
from acute food insecurity, will continue
A
to
ello se suma el
worsen.
impacto del cambio climático
In
y los
addition to
efectos de
that,
las
we have the
operaciones
impact of
militares
climate change
que pueden
and the
provocar
impact
la
of military
destrucción de
operations, which could
infraestructuras,
lead to the
incluidos
destruction
puertos
of
e instalaciones de
infrastructure, including
almacenamiento, lo que
ports and
obstaculizará
storage
la
facilities.
distribución y el
This will
almacenamiento de
hamper the
alimentos.
distribution and the
Señora
storage of
Presidenta,
food.
el
Madam
conflicto en el Mar
President, the
Rojo no solo
conflict in the
amenaza
Red
con
Sea is
revertir los limitados
not only
avances que se había
threatens to
logrado en la
reverse the limited progress
restauración de los
achieved in
medios de vida
restoring
de los
the
yemeníes,
livelihoods of
sino que
Yemenis,
también podría
but
alterar la
it
voluntad de
could
las partes
also
para avanzar en
impact
el
the will of
proceso
the
de paz.
parties to
Si bien las hostilidades se
pursue
han
the peace
mantenido en niveles
process.
relativamente
While
bajos, en
hostilities
los
have
últimos
remained at
meses se han
relatively low
registrado
levels,
enfrentamientos y
in
movimientos de
recent
tropas
months,
en
clashes
distintas
and troop
regiones del
movements
país.
have been seen in
Las
various
partes
regions of
también
the
continúan
country. The
amenazando
parties also
públicamente con
continue
volver a la guerra.
publicly to threaten a return to
No
war.
podemos esperar hasta que se
We
produzca una
cannot
escalada
wait
escalada de
wait
los combates
until
internos.
an escalation
Debemos
of
demostrar que
internal
este Consejo
fighting
mantiene una
happens. We
posición
must show
unificada de
that this
respaldo
council remains
en torno al
united
proceso de
in
paz,
supporting the peace
así como
process,
coordinar esfuerzos para
as well as in
reducir las
coordinating
tensiones.
efforts to reduce
Es por ello que mi
tensions.
país
For that
reitera la
reason, my
necesidad de
country
implementar la
reiterates the
resolución
need to implement
2722,
Resolution
cuyo pilar
2722,
fundamental es la
whose fundamental
cesación de los
pillar
ataques
is the
en contra de las
cessation of
embarcaciones
attacks
comerciales por los
against
hutíes,
commercial
que no
vessels
tienen
by
justificación
Houthis.
ni legitimidad
These
alguna.
attacks have no
Es
justification or
fundamental además
legitimacy
salvaguardar los
whatsoever.
avances logrados para
We
alcanzar un
must also
acuerdo que
safeguard
siente
progress
las bases
achieved
del fin del
in reaching
conflicto
an agreement,
y
laying the
continuar
foundation for
respaldando
an
la
end to the
labor de
conflict,
mediación
and
del
we
enviado
must
especial
continue to
Grunberg
support the
que enfrenta
mediation
crecientes
efforts of
desafíos.
Special Envoy Grunberg,
Mi
who is
delegación
facing
apoya
growing
las gestiones que el
challenges.
enviado
My
especial lleva
delegation
adelante para
supports the
mantener el apoyo
actions of the
regional
Special
e
Envoy
internacional a la
to
implementación de la hoja de ruta,
regional and
así como de
international
el
support for the
mantener
implementation of
los
the roadmap,
canales de
as well as in
comunicación
keeping
abiertos con
channels
todos
of
los actores.
communication open with all actors.
Para finalizar,
In conclusion,
Ecuador alienta a
Ecuador
UNMAS a
encourages
continuar
UNMAS to
cooperando con la
continue to
UNMA y
cooperate
el
with
PNUD en la ubicación y
UNMA
desactivación de
and
minas terrestres
UNDP
y
in
restos
locating
explosivos
and
diseminados en
deactivating
Yemen,
landmines
que
and
representan un
explosive
peligro
remnants
latente
scattered
para la
throughout
población
Yemen.
civil,
These are a latent
particularmente
danger for the
para
civilian
mujeres y
population,
niños en zonas
particularly for
rurales.
women and
Muchas
children
gracias.
in rural areas. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. We appreciate Special Envoy Grunberg and Director Vosornu for their informative briefings. Our appreciation also goes to Ms. Shakir for her briefing on especially the impacts on climate change in Yemen. Today, I wish to address 3 points. First, on the ongoing threat to maritime security by the Houthis, Japan welcomes the Security Council press statement issued last month in which the 15 council members spoke out in one voice that the Houthis' attacks on vessels are unacceptable. Unfortunately, however, the Houthis are continuing their dangerous military activities and disrupting the free and safe navigation on international shipping and global economy. Moreover, the Houthis are still detaining 25 innocent multinational crew members together with the Japanese-operated vessel Galaxy Leader. Nearly 150 days have passed since they have illegally seized by the Houthis. Once again, Japan strongly demands that the Houthis comply with this Council's repeated warnings, including in Resolution 2722, immediately cease their reckless conduct and release the Galaxy Leader and its crew. The Council members should remain united to tackle this challenge to our vitally important shipping lanes, a global problem affecting all of us. Madam President, second, the security situation in Yemen, Japan would like to reiterate its unwavering support to the work of the Special Envoy towards bringing lasting peace in Yemen. However, Japan regrets to see increased military campaign by the Houthis against the government of Yemen forces, which recently led to exchange to fire that resulted many deaths and injuries. We are also concerned about the Houthis' hostile economic measures against the government of Yemen that are undermining a conducive environment for peace talks. We sincerely hope that the parties will engage constructively under the auspices of the United Nations. In this context, it is essential to secure the full, equal, safe, and meaningful participation of women in the peace process. Third, on the humanitarian front, Director Vosolnu reminded us that more must be done to save the people of Yemen from the multifaceted crisis, including malnutrition and the spread of epidemics. The already dire humanitarian situation is being amplified by climate change. Japan calls for the international community to increase assistance to alleviate the plight of Yemenis, particularly women and children. In this regard, we should continue to urge the Houthis to lift the restrictions on women's freedom of movement, which negatively impact women's daily lives and curtail the ability of female aid workers. To conclude, Japan calls on all parties to work towards peace and stability in Yemen and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席女士，
Madam
我
President,
感谢各位同
I
胞人的通
thank
报。
all the briefers for their briefings.
当前也门局势依然复杂
At
严峻
present,，the
也
situation
门
in
问题有
Yemen
关
remains
各方
complex and
应当
daunting.
坚持
All
政
parties
治解决的
concerned
大
should
方向，
adhere to the general
排除
direction
干
of
扰，
political
相向而
settlement,
行，
remove
共同
interference,
推进
move
也
towards
人
each
主导
other,
也
and
门
work
所有
together
的
to
全面
promote
政
a
治进程。
comprehensive political process that is
我们尊
Yemeni-led
重
and
也门
Yemeni
各方
owned.
保
We
持
urge all
克制，
parties in Yemen to
避免
exercise
刺激
restraint,
局势
avoid
升级，
provoking an
为
escalation
政治
of the
进程
situation,
创造
and to
良
create
好
a
氛围。
favorable atmosphere for the
中
political
方支持
process.
格伦德
China
伯格
supports
特
the
使所
efforts
做
of
的努
Special
力，
Envoy Grunberg
期待各
and
上，
expects
特
all
别是对
parties, in
也门局
particular
势有影
countries
响
with
力的国
influence
家
on the situation
发
in
挥建
Yemen,
设性
to
作用。
play a constructive role.
中方对红海紧张
China's
局势
concern about
表示关
tensions
切，
in the Red Sea
再
and
次呼吁
reiterates its
不再
call
武
on the
装，
Houthis
尊
to
重各
respect
国
the
商
right
船
of
根据
commercial
国际
vessels
法
of all
在
countries
红海
to
水域的
navigate in the
航
waters
行
of the
权利，
Red Sea in accordance
立即
with
停止有
international
关
law
袭扰
and
行
to
为，
cease immediately
呼吁
relevant
有关方面
attacks.
保持
We call
克
on the
制，
parties concerned to
停止
exercise
采取加
restraint
剧紧
and
张局势的
refrain
行
from
动。
actions that might exacerbate
中方重
tensions.
申，
China
安理
reiterates
会
that the
从
Security
未授
Council
权
has
任何
never
国家
authorized any
对
country
也
to
门使
use
用武
force
力，
against Yemen, and
任
that
何
no
国家
country
不
should
得曲解、
misinterpret
滥
or
用
abuse
国
international
际法
law
和
and
安理
Security
会
Council
决议。
resolutions.
缓解也门人道危机
Alleviating the
是国际社
humanitarian
会的
crisis
共
in
同任
Yemen
务。
is a shared
也
task
门 冲
of the
突已
international
经持续
community.
9
The
年，
conflict in Yemen has
医
lasted
院、
for
学
9
校
years,
等大量基
causing
础设
massive
施损
destruction
毁，
of infrastructure,
全国有
including
4/5
hospitals and
以上人
schools,
口生
more
活
than
贫困，
4/5 of the country's
超过
population living in
450
poverty,
万
and more
适
than
龄儿童无
4.5
法
million
就学。
school-age children unable to attend
中
school.
方呼吁国际社
China
会
calls
加大
on the
对也
international
门的人道
community
和发
to
展投入，
increase its investment
期
in
待世
Yemen's
界粮食计划
humanitarian
署
and development
早日
efforts
恢复在
and
也
looks
门
forward
北
to
部
the
的
early resumption of
援助工
assistance
作。
program by the WFP in northern
主
Yemen.
席女士，
Madam President,
红海紧
the
张局
tensions
势
in the
是
Red
加
Sea
沙
are
冲
a
突外溢
visible
影响的显
manifestation
著表
of the
现。
spillover effects of
尽
the
管安理
Gaza
会通过了
conflict,
明确要求
despite the
停火
adoption
的
of the
第
Security Council
2728 号
Resolution
决议，
2728, which
但直到该月结
explicitly
束，
demands a
战火
ceasefire.
仍在
The
延
fighting
宕，
continued unabated
对
through
地
the
区
end of
和平稳定
Ramadan,
的威
and
胁
the threat to
持
regional
续加
peace
剧。
and stability continues to grow.
以色列应切实
Israel
履
should
行联合
fulfill
国
in
会
good
员国
faith
义务，
its obligations
全
and the
面
member
落实
states
安
of
理
the
会决议要
UN
求，
and fully implement
立即
the
停
demands
止
of the
对
Council
加沙的
resolutions
军事进
by
攻，
immediately ceasing
停止
its
集体
military
惩
attacks
罚
on Gaza and
巴勒斯
ceasing
坦人
its
民。
collective punishment
中
of the
方支持安理
Palestinian
会
people.
根据形势
China
的发展，
supports the Security
采取
Council
进一
in
步的
taking
必要
further
行动。
action in light of the developments on the
谢
ground.
谢主席。
Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель.
Madam President.
Признательны
We are
спецпосланнику
thankful to
Генсекретаря
Special
по Йемену
Envoy,
господину Хансу Грюнбергу
Mr. Hans
и директору
Grunberg,
ОГВ
as
по
well as
операциям
OCHA
госпоже
Director of
Эдем
Operations and
Лассорно
Advocacy,
за
Madam
доклад о
Edem
политической
Lassonu,
и
for the
гуманитарной
report
обстановке в этой
on the
стране.
political and humanitarian
Приняли к
situations in
сведению
the
доклад
country. We've taken note
госпожи
of the
Шакир.
briefing from Madam Shakir.
Россия
The Russian
продолжает
Federation
убеждать всех
continues
вовлеченных в
to
йеменскую
seek to
парадигму
persuade
игроков
all
способствовать
stakeholders involved in the
установлению
Yemeni
в
paradigm
этой
to help
стране
facilitate the
устойчивого
establishment
режима
in that country
прекращения
of a
огня
sustained
и
ceasefire
восстановлению
regime
нормальной
and
жизни.
the restoration of normal life.
Выражаем
We
полную
extend our
поддержку
full
деятельности
support for
господина Грунберга,
the efforts of Mr.
нацеленной на
Grunberg,
достижение этих
efforts
целей
which are geared
и
towards
эвентуальный
achievement of
запуск
those goals
полноформатного
and the eventual launch of
инклюзивного
a
национального
full-fledged,
диалога под эгидой
inclusive,
ООН.
nationwide dialogue under the aegis of the United
Вновь
Nations.
обращаем внимание
Once
на
again,
необходимость
we draw
обновления
attention to the need
однозначно
for the
устаревшей и
renewal
не
of the
отражающей реалии на
patently
земле международной
obsolete
правовой базы
international
йеменского
legal
регулирования.
basis for Yemeni settlement, which clearly no longer reflects
Срочного
realities on the
разрешения
ground.
требует и
There is a need to
деградирующая
urgently
гуманитарная ситуация в
address
стране.
also the
Нуждающимися
deteriorating
в
humanitarian
помощи
situation in the
является
country.
порядка 18
Approximately
миллионов йеменцев.
18 million
Это
Yemeni
почти
people need
половина
humanitarian
населения страны.
assistance. That is nearly half of the country's population.
Поступают тревожные
We are
сообщения о
receiving
вспышке
alarming
холеры,
reports about the
болезни,
outbreak of
которую легко
cholera.
купировать
Cholera is a
при
disease which
наличии
can
нужных
easily be
медикаментов.
basically treated with the
Именно
presence
их,
of
однако, в
basic
Йемене
medicines,
катастрофически не
and yet
хватает.
there is a catastrophic shortage
Подчеркиваем,
of
что
such
йеменцы, вне
medication in
зависимости от
Yemen. We
географии своего
stress that
проживания,
Yemeni
должны
people,
иметь
irrespective of
беспрепятственный доступ
where
к
they
еде,
reside,
лекарствам
need
и
to
другим
have
необходимым вещам.
unfettered access to food, medicines, and other necessities.
Тревожит нас и ситуация
We
в
are also
близлежащих
alarmed by
к
the
Йемену
situation
акваториях,
in the
включая
waters
Красное море.
surrounding Yemen. This includes the Red Sea.
Россия
The
последовательно
Russian Federation
выступает
has
за
consistently
обеспечение
advocated
безопасного и свободного
for the
судоходства в этом
safe
районе.
and free navigation in those waters and
Мы
region. We
последовательно осуждаем
consistently
атаки на
condemn
мирные
attacks
корабли,
on
представляющие
civilian
угрозу их
vessels
экипажам и
which
грузам.
pose threats to
В
their
частности,
crews and
нападение
cargo,
на судно
specifically the
True
attack on
Confidence,
the True
повлекшее за
Confidence,
собой гибель членов экипажа.
which resulted in the death deaths of crew
Требуем
members.
немедленного
We
освобождения
demand the
судна
immediate
Galaxy Leader
release
и
of
его
Galaxy
команды.
Leader, crew members, and the vessel itself.
В контактах с
In our
представителями
contacts
Ансар
with
Аллах
representatives of
повторяем
Ansar Allah,
призыв
we
немедленно прекратить
reiterate our
подобные
call for
действия
an
и
immediate end
переключить
to such
внимание
actions and
на
for attention
достижение
to
мира внутри
shift
самого
to the
Йемена.
achievement of peace within Yemen itself.
Однако надо
However,
понимать,
one
что
must
первопричина этой
understand that the
ситуации
root cause of
продолжение
the
Израилем
situation
кровопролития в
is the
секторе Газа,
ongoing bloodshed by
нарушение
Israel
резолюции
in the
Совета
Gaza Strip
Безопасности ООН
in breach of
2728.
Security Council Resolution 2728.
Эта чудовищная
This is
эскалация,
a
стоившая
horrific
жизни более
escalation which
33
claimed the lives of
тысячам
more than
мирных палестинцев, самым
33,000
серьезным образом
peaceful
резонирует на всем Ближнем
Palestinians
Востоке,
with grave
сказываясь в том
repercussions throughout
числе
the
и на
entire
регионе
Middle
Красного
East,
моря.
including repercussions in the Red Sea
Прекращение
region.
насилия в зоне
An end to the
Палестино-израильского
violence in the
конфликта – ключ к
Palestine-Israel
спокойствию и там.
conflict zone is key to tranquility and calm in
Отмечаем
the
и
Red Sea as
деструктивную
well.
роль
We also note
самопровозглашенной
the
коалиции во
destructive
главе
role of the
США и Великобритании,
self-proclaimed
продолжающей
coalition helmed
еженедельно
by the United
совершать
States and the
атаки по
United
йеменской
Kingdom. They
территории.
continue to carry out on a weekly basis
Отсутствие
attacks on
эффекта на
Yemeni
земле
soil.
и
The
очевидная
absence of results on the
неспособность
ground
подорвать
and their
военный потенциал
blatant
хуситов
inability to
Вашингтон и Лондон не
thwart
останавливают.
the military capabilities of the Houthis is something which has
Вновь
not
подчеркиваем,
stopped
что
Washington or
ракетно-бомбовые
London.
удары
Once
западной
again, we
коалиции,
stress
ведомой
that
США,
missile and
территорию
bomb
суверенного
attacks by
Йемена,
the Western
категорически
US-led coalition
неприемлемы,
targeting the
равно
sovereign
как и
territory
попытки
of Yemen
оправдать
are
агрессию резолюции
categorically
Совета
unacceptable.
Безопасности
Also unacceptable
2722
are attempts to
или
justify
ссылками
the
на
aggression
право
with
на
resolution
самооборону по статье
2722
51
or to
Устава
justify
ООН.
this with references to the right to self-defense
Подобные
under
действия наносят ущерб
under Article
внутриеменскому
51 of the UN
регулированию,
Charter.
подрывая
These are
усилия
actions which
международных и региональных
undermine
посредников.
internal resolution in Yemen and thwart the efforts of
По
international
сути,
and
во
regional
многом именно
mediators.
из-за подобного
In
порочного
essence,
круга
largely
эскалации
thanks as a
йеменское регулирование
consequence of this
поставлено
kind
на
of a
вынужденную
vicious
паузу.
cycle of escalation, Yemeni settlement has
Более того, в
been
условиях
forced to
отсутствия
come to a
формального перемирия
pause.
между странами может
Furthermore,
произойти и
in the
деградация
absence of a
ситуации.
formal truce between the parties,
Как нам
the
сегодня
situation may
сообщил
further
господин Грюнберг,
deteriorate. As Mr. Grunberg reported to us
во
today,
столкновении между йеменскими
the
сторонами по линии
clashes and
фронта
hostilities
участились.
among the Yemeni
Эта
parties
опасная
on the
тенденция
front line
способна
have become
привести к новому
increasingly
витку
frequent.
напряженности
This
внутри
is a
страны.
dangerous trend which is liable to result in further escalation of tensions within the country.
При этом
At the
отмечаем, что в
same time,
последнее
we
время,
note that
очевидно,
recently,
поняв
clearly,
тщетность
having
избранной силовой линии,
grasped the
США стали все чаще
futility of
рассуждать о
opting for military
необходимости
action, the United
деэскалации
States
и жестов доброй
has
воли.
begun increasingly expatiating
Это
on the
вселяет
need to
определенный оптимизм.
de-escalate and for the need for actions and gestures of goodwill. This
Россия с самого
instills a certain
начала
degree of
йеменского
optimism.
конфликта
From the very
последовательно
beginning of
подчеркивала,
the
что
Yemeni
решить
conflict,
его
Russia
можно
has consistently
исключительно
stressed the
политико-дипломатическим
following: the way to
способом, на
resolve it
основе
is
принципа
exclusively
инклюзивности,
through political diplomatic means on the
подразумевающего
basis of a
участие всех
principle of
йеменских
inclusivity,
протагонистов, включая
which
Ансар Аллах.
entails the participation of all Yemeni protagonists, including Ansar Allah.
Госпожа председатель,
Madam President,
с большим сожалением узнали,
it
что
was
США
with
все-таки
great
завершили передачу
regret that we
захваченных
learned that
ими
the
в
U.S. has
Оманском заливе
concluded the transfer
вооружений и
of the
боеприпасов
weapons
в
and
зону
munitions they
конфликта на Украине.
seized in the Gulf of Oman, and they transferred them to the
Хотели
conflict
бы в
zone
этой
in
связи напомнить,
Ukraine.
что
In this
какого-либо
regard, we wish to
особого
recall
инспекционного
the
режима по
following:
досмотру судов в
any
международных
specific
водах в
inspections
йеменском контексте
regime
не
to
существует.
inspect vessels
И
in
подобные
international
действия
seas in the
резолюции
Yemeni context does not
2216, на
exist.
которую ссылается
And
США, не
these kinds of
предусмотрены.
actions are not provided for under Resolution
Осуждаем
2216,
расширительное
to which the
трактование
U.S.
положений
refers.
профильных
We
резолюций Совета
condemn the broad
Безопасности ООН по
interpretation of
Йемену,
the
в том числе
provisions of
санкционных.
specific Security Council resolutions on
Рассматриваем
Yemen,
санкционный
including
режим
sanctions
Совета в качестве
resolutions. We view
вспомогательного
the
механизма
sanctions regime of the
политического
Council as a
регулирования, а не средства
regime,
наказания.
a subsidiary mechanism for political settlement,
Подобные
not as a
безответственные действия
means
свидетельствуют
for
о
doling
том,
out
что в
punishment.
Вашингтоне
These kinds
по-прежнему
of reckless
стремятся навязывать
actions
всему
show
миру
that
так
Washington
называемый
continues to
порядок,
strive to
основанный на
impose
правилах,
on the whole world its
при котором
so-called
правила
rules-based
формулируют и
order,
адаптируют
where
под
the
свои нужды
rules are
США и их
formulated and
союзники.
adapted to tailor to be reflected to advance their needs by the United States and their allies.
Ничего хорошего миру и безопасности
Nothing
на нашей
good for
планете,
peace and
подобное
security on our
эгоистичное
planet will come
упрямство
of
и
such
нежелание подчиняться
egotistical
нормам международного права
intractability and
не принесут.
unwillingness to act in accordance with the norms of international law.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you,
Je
Madam
remercie les
President. I would
intervenants
like to
de
thank
leur exposé.
the briefers.
La région
for
a connu
their
un développement majeur dans la nuit du
briefings.
13 au 14 avril,
The
avec
region has
l'attaque sans
seen a major
précédent menée par
development
l'Iran et ses
on
proxys
from
contre
the
Israël.
13th to the 14th
La
in the
France la
evening with the
condamne avec la plus grande
unprecedented
fermeté.
attack carried out by Iran
Cette
and its
attaque constitue
proxies against
évidemment une
Israel.
menace sérieuse et
France
majeure à
condemns
la
this
paix et la
attack in the
sécurité
strongest
internationale,
terms. Obviously,
et en
it is a
particulier
serious and
à la
major threat
stabilité et la
to
sécurité de
international
la
peace
région.
and security and to the
La France
stability
exprime
and
sa
security of the
solidarité avec le
region.
peuple
France
israélien et
expresses
rappelle
its
son attachement à la
solidarity with the
sécurité
Israeli
d'Israël,
people and
de nos
calls its
partenaires et à la stabilité régionale. Le rapport du secrétaire général le montre, Les attaques
The
menées par les
SG's
Houthis en
report
mer
bears
Rouge et
out
dans
the
le golfe
fact that
d'Aden
the
se
Houthi attacks
poursuivent
in the Red
malgré les
Sea
mises en
and the
garde
Gulf
qui leur
of
sont
Aden
adressées par ce Conseil.
continue despite the warnings
La France
of
condamne
by
fermement
this
les
council.
attaques conduites par les
France
Houthis depuis plusieurs
firmly
mois.
condemns
Elles
the
portent
attacks
atteinte
carried
aux
out by
droits
the
et libertés de
Houthis over the past
navigation,
several months.
déstabilisent le
They
Yémen et
infringe
la
on the
région
rights and
et
freedoms
nuisent
of
aux intérêts des
navigation,
pays de la région
destabilize
ainsi
Yemen
que
and
de
the region,
l'ensemble des pays
and
bénéficiant du commerce
adversely
international qui
impact the
transitent par cette
interests
zone.
of the countries of the
Les
region,
impacts sur le
as
plan
well as all
environnemental
of
et
the countries
humanitaire sont
benefiting from
préoccupants.
international trade
Nous appelons
transiting
les
this
Houthis
zone.
à libérer
The impacts, the
immédiatement le
environmental
Galaxy
and
Leader et son
humanitarian
équipage
impacts are
retenus depuis
disturbing. We
novembre
remind
2023.
Houthis to
Nous
freely
sommes
to
également préoccupés par les
release
informations
immediately the
indiquant que les
Galaxy Leader
Houthis
and
ont
its crew
participé à
held
l'attaque de
since
l'Iran
November
contre Israël dans la nuit
2023.
du
We are
13 au
also
14
concerned
avril.
about the information
Face au
indicating
comportement
that Houthis
irresponsable des
participated
Houthis,
in the
la
Iranian
France
attack
poursuit son
against Israel
engagement dans le
on the
cadre de
13th.
l'opération européenne
Given
Aspide
the
pour
irresponsible
garantir
behavior of
la
the Houthis,
sûreté
France
maritime
will
et la liberté de
remain committed
navigation
to the
conformément au droit
Aspides European
international et
operation
en
to
lien avec ses
guarantee
partenaires.
maritime safety and the
La
freedom of
résolution
navigation in accordance
2722
with
rappelle que
international law
l'exercice des
and
droits et
working with our
libertés de
partners.
navigation doit être
Resolution
respecté et
2722
que les États
recalls the
ont,
fact
en
that the
accord avec le droit
exercising
international,
the
le
rights and
droit de
freedoms of
défendre leurs
navigation
navires
must
contre
be
les attaques.
respected, and in
Elle doit
accordance with
être pleinement
international law,
appliquée.
states must have the right to
Madame la
defend their
Présidente,
vessels against
au
attack.
plan sécuritaire,
That
il faut
resolution must be
transformer la
fully
trêve de
implemented.
facto en une cessation
Madam
complète
President,
et
on
durable
the
des
security fund,
hostilités pour
we
éviter
must
toute reprise du conflit sur le
transform
terrain.
this de facto truce into a
La
complete and
situation
lasting
humanitaire est catastrophique
cessation
et
of
s'est dégradée au
hostilities
cours
to
des
avoid
derniers
any
mois.
resumption of conflict on the
L'insécurité en
ground.
mer Rouge
The
et dans le
humanitarian
golfe
situation
d'Aden
is
a des
catastrophic and
conséquences
has
sur le coût
worsened
des
in recent
opérations
months.
humanitaires et les
Insecurity in the
approvisionnements,
Red Sea and in the Gulf
alors
of
même que
Aden
les
has
financements manquent.
consequences on the cost of
Il est
humanitarian
également
operations and
essentiel
supplies,
que les Houthis cessent de
and funding
déstabiliser
is
l'économie du
insufficient.
Yémen
It is
et
also
de mener une
essential
guerre
for the Houthis
économique
to
contre le
cease
gouvernement.
destabilizing the Yemeni
Leur attitude
economy and
irresponsable
causing
contribue à
an economic
l'appauvrissement de la
war against the
population.
government. Their irresponsible
La France
attitude
condamne
has
l'émission de
led to
monnaie
the
contrefaite
impoverishment of
par
the
les Houthis
population,
et
and
soutient la Banque
France also
centrale du
condemns
Yémen
the
basée à
issuance
Aden
of counterfeit
dans sa
currency
mission
by
de
the
garantie de
Houthis,
la
and we
stabilité du
support the
secteur
central
financier du
bank of
pays.
Yemen based in Aden
Nous
in
devons
its mission
rester
to
collectivement
guarantee
mobilisés
the
pour répondre
stability
aux
of the
besoins des
country's
populations
financial
civiles au
sector.
Yémen.
Together, we
L'insécurité
must
alimentaire
stand
touche
ready to meet
70%
the
des
needs
enfants
of
de
the
moins de 2
civilians
ans.
in
C'est
Yemen.
leur
Food
développement qui est donc en
insecurity
jeu.
impacts 70%
Nous
of
sommes aussi
children under the
préoccupés par
age of
l'épidémie
2.
de
The
choléra
very
qui se
development is at stake, and
répand
we are
dans
also
tout le pays.
concerned about the cholera epidemic
Pour faire
spreading
face à
throughout the
cette
country.
situation,
To
il est
address this
essentiel de garantir
situation, we
tous les
must
accès
guarantee
nécessaires
all
et
necessary
essentiel que les
access, and
travailleurs
humanitarian
humanitaires
workers
puissent
must be
exercer
able
leur
to
mission
carry out
sans
their
entrave,
missions
notamment
without
les
hindrance,
personnels
in
féminins en
particular
zone Houthi.
female staff in Houthi
Nous
regions.
exprimons par ailleurs notre
Moreover, we
préoccupation
express our
face à la
concern at the
multiplication des arrestations
increase
et
in
des exactions
arrests
commises
and
par les Houthis contre la
abuses committed
population,
by Houthis
à
against the
l'image de la
population.
destruction brutale de maisons à
We've seen
Rada le mois
images of
dernier,
the brutal
qui a
destruction
causé
of
la mort
homes
de
in
plusieurs
Rada
de leurs
last month,
habitants, dont des
which
femmes
led to the
et des
death
enfants.
of several inhabitants,
La
including
France
women and
soutient les
children.
mécanismes onusiens qui
France
agissent en
supports
faveur d'une
UN
plus grande
mechanisms
stabilité et
for
sécurité
greater
au Yémen,
stability and
à
security
l'image
in
d'UNVIM,
Yemen,
qui contribue à la
like
lutte contre les trafics d'armes en
UNVIM,
mer
which is
Rouge.
contributing to
Grâce aux
combating
inspections qu'il mène,
weapons
il crée la
trafficking in the Red
confiance et
Sea.
facilite les
Thanks to the
importations
inspections
commerciales et
UNVIM carries
l'acheminement
out,
de
it
l'aide
has
humanitaire
created
au
trust and
Yémen.
facilitates
Il doit être
commercial
renforcé et mieux
imports and the
financé.
provision of humanitarian
Nous
aid to
devons
Yemen.
aussi
It
soutenir par
must
des
be
actions
bolstered
concrètes
and
les
better
efforts de
financed.
réforme du
We must
gouvernement du
also, through
Yémen
concrete
et lui
action,
donner les
support the
moyens
efforts
d'exercer à nouveau sa
the
souveraineté sur
governments of
l'ensemble du
Yemen's
pays.
efforts for reform and give it all
Enfin,
the
la France
means
réitère son plein
necessary to
soutien à
restore
l'envoyé
its sovereignty
spécial et
over
à
the
ses
country
efforts
once again.
pour définir et
France
mettre en
reiterates
œuvre
its full
une feuille
support
de
for the
route
special
politique
envoy in his
inclusive.
efforts to define and
Nous
implement
appelons les
an
Houthis
inclusive
à cesser
political
leurs
roadmap.
attaques
We call
et à
upon the
choisir la voie
Houthis
du
to cease their
processus de paix
attacks
sous
and to
l'égide de
choose
l'envoyé
the peace
spécial.
process under the auspices of the
La
special
France salue
envoy.
la mobilisation à
France
ce sujet
welcomes
de
the
l'Arabie
efforts
saoudite,
in this
d'Oman,
regard of Saudi
ainsi que
Arabia
d'autres
and
acteurs
Oman, as
régionaux.
well as other regional
La
stakeholders.
participation
the
effective des
effective
femmes yéménites aux
participation of
négociations
Yemeni
politiques
women
doit
in the
être
political
garantie.
negotiations
La
must be
France
guaranteed.
continuera sa
France will
mobilisation en ce
continue its
sens.
efforts
Je
in
vous
this
remercie.
regard. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France. I will now make a statement in my national capacity. I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and OCHA Director Vosurno for their comprehensive briefings, and Ms. Shaki for her strong testimony today. The 9-year conflict in Yemen has created dire humanitarian conditions for Yemeni civilians. More than 17.5 million people face acute food insecurity, with numbers likely to increase in the coming months. Earlier, we were reminded how important it is for the international community to scale up support to the humanitarian response plan, this at a time when this plan remains drastically underfunded. The essential delivery of humanitarian aid continues to be hampered due to humanitarian access impediments. Authorities must lift restrictions on women's freedom of movement. These restrictions exacerbate gender inequality and structural barriers hindering access to education, healthcare, and income for their families. We are concerned for increasing cases of cholera in Yemen and call for rapid, robust response by the international community. Malta is concerned that space for mediation efforts remain constrained due to escalations in the Red Sea and the region. We call on the Houthis to immediately cease all attacks and actions against commercial shipping and abide by their obligations under international law, including full adherence to Resolution 2722. Recent skirmishes in Yemen, including in Laj and Marib, also reflect the tenuous security situation. On the socio-economic front, the decision by the Houthis to issue new currency is concerning. Unilateral decisions that deepen the fragmentation of Yemen's already weakened economy only harms the well-being of Yemenis. We call on parties to de-escalate tensions and prioritize dialogue to find an agreement that will lead to sustainable peace. The establishment of a UN roadmap will be crucial to ensure the implementation of a nationwide ceasefire, an inclusive Yemeni-led and owned political process under UN auspices. Women must be full, equal, and meaningful participants in all diplomatic efforts to find peace. And as has been highlighted again today by Ms. Shakir, we must not forget that Yemen is the third country most susceptible to climate-related impacts and one of the least prepared for climate shocks. According to a recent report by the UN Environmental Programme, environmental stresses such as water scarcity, desertification, and extreme weather events are highly intertwined with security concerns. In 2023, over three-quarters of newly displaced individuals experienced such displacement due to severe weather occurrences. While women in rural communities remain greatly dependent upon agriculture for their livelihoods, we also acknowledge their pivotal role in helping ease tensions over natural resources. Furthermore, through the work of women-led civil society organizations, they help meet the essential needs of communities in remote and front-line areas. The international community should support Yemen to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. This includes ensuring adequate access to climate financing, assisting national preparatory systems, and invest in climate-resilient measures through effective strategies integrated with conflict prevention efforts. The Security Council needs to recognize this nexus to address the multiple impacts on communities and enhance long-term stability in Yemen. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
Madam President, at the outset, I would like to congratulate you on presiding over the Council for this month. I wish you luck in your endeavors, and I thank your predecessor, the representative of Japan, for their successful presidency during the past month. I would also like to thank Mr. Hans Grunberg and Ms. Adam Wosornu for their briefings, and I thank Ms. Wamid Shakir for her briefing as well. Madam President, a just and permanent peace was and remains the main objective of the Presidential Leadership Council and the Yemeni government. Building peace in Yemen is a Yemeni, regional, and international imperative on our path to restore state institutions that would guarantee rights, liberties, justice, and equal citizenship that would make Yemen and the Yemeni people more safe and secure and strengthen their regional and international presence. Restoring state institutions is a main priority and the ultimate goal of any efforts to reach a political settlement without discrimination or exclusion. We need to build a brighter future for the Yemeni people. The Yemeni government once again expresses its openness and welcomes all initiatives and good offices to achieve a comprehensive and sustainable peace based on the national, regional, and international agreed upon terms of reference of the political settlement, namely the GCC initiative and its implementation mechanism, and the outcomes of the Comprehensive National Dialogue Conference, as well as Security Council resolutions, namely Resolution Resolution 2216, which represents a roadmap to address the Yemeni crisis. My government also reaffirms that it supports all regional and international efforts, as well as the efforts of the UN Special Envoy to put an end to this conflict and achieve peace in Yemen. The Yemeni government remains committed to the choice of peace, and we welcomed the truce announcement, and we also welcomed its extension and the widening of its humanitarian benefits to the Yemeni people in the areas under the control of the Houthi militias. We also welcome the number of measures and arrangements to build trust, which would lead to a proposed roadmap so that we can resume a comprehensive political process and a transitional period towards building peace and state institutions that are democratic and meet the aspirations of the Yemeni people. Despite these efforts of mediation from our brethren in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, however, although we were nearing the signature of a roadmap, the terrorist Houthi militias, as usual, decided to shirk their responsibilities towards peace. They chose to undermine the political process with a destructive and dangerous escalation in the Red Sea under the pretense of assisting the Palestinian people in Gaza. However, time has shown the falsehood of these allegations. These militias destroying homes and killing their residents. These militias laying siege to cities, looting property, terrorizing women and children, killing and kidnapping civilians. These militias could never support just causes. They have multiplied their restrictions and violations, as well as their military escalation at all fronts. Although there's a vulnerable truth, they were unable to honor their obligations because they can only live in a swamp of conflict. Their project is a project of war and destruction. They are not for peace. They cannot live in peace with society. History has shown this time and again. In this regard, I would like to commend the good offices of our brethren in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to address the Yemeni crisis, achieve peace, and alleviate the humanitarian suffering of the Yemeni people. The terrorist Houthi militias continue with their violations and grave crimes against the Yemeni people, the latest of which razing the homes of innocent civilians to the ground in the Rada city in Al-Bayda governorate, killing the residents of these homes. This crime resulted in the killing and injuring of around 35 civilians, mostly women and children. They have killed 9 members of one household. This heinous crime took place during the holy month of Ramadan. This is not an isolated act. This is a part of a long series of brutal crimes committed by these Iranian-backed terrorist militias. This crime is a clear example of how these militias, although they claim that they support the Palestinian people in Gaza, but at the same time, on a daily basis, they perpetrate acts of terrorism, murder, and violations against the Yemeni people. They continue to impose an unjust siege on the city of Taiz. This has caused endless suffering and humanitarian crises for over 4 million people in this city. They have shirked their responsibilities when it comes to opening roads. They continue to adopt a policy of starvation and collective punishment. They also continue to target cities, villages, and residential areas, as well as the homes of citizens. They've used sniper fire to target innocent civilians, including women and children. They've perpetrated dozens of crimes. They've planted mines that
لدعوات
claimed the
هذا
lives of
المجلس
thousands
الموقر والمجتمع
of
الدولي
civilians.
لوقف
This
هذه
in
الحرب
blatant violation
واستئناف المسار
of the cause
السياسي
of the international
ورفع
community and
المعاناة
this council to
الإنسانية
put
عن
an end to
الشعب
this
اليمني.
war, to resume the political
وفي
process
الوقت
and
الذي
alleviate the
تدين
suffering of the
الحكومة
Yemeni
اليمنية
people.
وبأشد العبارات
The
جرائم الميليشيات
Yemeni
الحوثية
government
الإرهابية إنها
condemns in the
تؤكد أن
strongest
هذه
terms the
الجرائم
crimes of the
والانتهاكات
terrorist Houthi
لن تسقط
militias. We
بالتقادم
reaffirm that
وتجدد
these crimes
التزامها
have no
باستعادة
statute of
مؤسسات
limitations.
الدولة
We
وفرض
remain
الأمن
committed to
والاستقرار
restoring state
والقضاء على
institutions,
هذه
to imposing
الممارسات
security,
الإرهابية
stability,
وحق
and
الشعب
to
اليمني
end
الصامت.
these terrorist
السيد
practices
الرئيس إن
against the
استهداف
steadfast
الميليشيات الحوثية
Yemeni people.
الإرهابية المتكرر
Madam
لناقلات النفط
President,
والسفن
the
التجارية في
terrorist Houthi
البحر الأحمر
militias
ومضيق
continue to
باب المندب
target oil
وازدياد وتيرة
tankers
أعمال
and
القرصنة
commercial
البحرية
vessels in the Red Sea.
يعكس مدى استهتار هذه
This
الميليشيات
shows the
وعدم
disregard
اكتراثها
of these
بالتداعيات
militias
الكارثية
to
لأي
the
تسرب
environmental
النفطي
impact
على
of any
القطاع
oil spill
الاقتصادي
on the
والزراعي
economic and
والسمكي والبيئة
agricultural
البحرية والتنوع
sectors, the
البيولوجي في
fish,
اليمن
the
والدول
maritime
المشاطئة.
environment, and
وفي هذا
biodiversity
السياق
in Yemen
تدعو
and coastal
حكومة
countries.
بلادي
In this regard,
إلى تقديم الدعم
we
اللازم
call on providing
وبشتى
the
الطرق
necessary
لمواجهة
support
الآثار
in order
السلبية
to
المحتملة
confront
الناجمة
the
عن غرق
potential
السفينة
negative
روبيمار
impact,
وأهمية
the
توافر الجهود
drowning of the
الإقليمية
Rubimar
والدولية
vessel. We
للتعامل
need
مع هذه
concerted
التحديات
regional and
البيئية
international
التي
efforts to deal
تهدد
with
اليمن
these
والمنطقة
environmental challenges
والحلول دون
threatening
وقوع
Yemen
الكوارث
and the region
وحوادث
so that we
التلوث
can
التي
prevent
تمثل
any
تهديدا مباشرا
pollution
للبيئة
that
البحرية في
would
البحر الأحمر.
directly threaten
إنما تقوم
the
به هذه
maritime environment
الميليشيات
in the Red Sea.
من تصعيد في البحر الأحمر
Houthi
يمثل خلطا
militias continue
للأوراق
to escalate
وهروبا
in
من
the Red
استحقاقات
Sea
السلام
so that
وتنفيذا
they could
لأجندة
shirk their
النظام الإيراني
responsibility towards
ومخططاته
peace,
في اليمن
to implement
والمنطقة
the agendas and
وزعزعة
plans of
الأمن
the Iranian
والاستقرار
regime in
الإقليمي
Yemen and
والدولي
the region,
وتحذر
to
الحكومة اليمنية
destabilize
مجددا
the region
من
and the
استمرار
world.
تدفق
Once
الأسلحة
again, we
الإيرانية
warn against the
للميليشيات
flow of
الحوثية
Iranian
الإرهابية
weapons
في
to the
انتهاك
terrorist Houthi
صارخا
militias in a blatant
لقرارات مجلس
violation
الأمن
of
ذات
Security
الصلة
Council
لا سيما
resolutions,
القرارين
notably
2216
resolutions
2140
2216 and
ومخاطرها على
2140.
إطالة أمد الصراع في
This
اليمن
could lead to
ومفاقمة الأزمة
prolonging the
الإنسانية.
conflict in
وقد
Yemen
حذرت
and
الحكومة
worsening
اليمنية
of
في
the
وقت مبكر
humanitarian
وفي أكثر من
crisis.
مناسبة
We have
وأمام
warned
هذا
early
المجلس
on and
الموقر
on
وفي
more than one
بيانات
occasion,
فخامة
and before
اللاقب
this
دكتور
council,
رشاد
as
محمد
well as
العليمي
in the
رئيس
statements
مجلس
of His
القيادة
Excellency
الرئاسي
Dr.
أمام
Rishad
الجمعية
Al-Alaimi, the
العامة
President
للأمم
of the
المتحدة
Presidential Leadership
من هذه
Council, before the
المخططات
General